week 11 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few quarterbacks I looked at on the waiver wire this week. The first guy, Taylor Heineke of the Washington Commanders. So right now, time of recording this video, he didn't play yet the Monday Night Football game at the Philadelphia Eagles. But Heineke, he's been a pretty good starter or fill-in guy for this Washington Commander team. Them winning 2 out of 3 ball games so far. So week 7 versus Green Bay, 201 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, and 4 rushing yards. Week 8 in Indianapolis, 279 pass yards, and Into 29 rush yards, a touchdown. And week 9 versus Minnesota, 149 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, and an Into. So right here, week 11, a good matchup at the Houston Texans that give up a lot of fantasy points to quarterbacks. We know this Texan team's one of the worst teams in all pro football, no doubt about it. And right now, with a decent matchup and with some bye weeks in deeper leagues, Heineke right now, he's available still in 87% of fantasy leagues. And no matter the outcome in the Eagle game, unless obviously he gets hurt, he's a pickup this week. The next guy, Matt Ryan of the Indianapolis Colts. So Matt Ryan quickly back into the starting lineup with Jeff Saturday as the coach now over there for this Indianapolis Colts team. And the Colts win at 25-20, beating the Vegas Raiders. So right now, Ryan looked pretty decent. He had a good ball game. They won as well, obviously. Paris Campbell was involved. Michael Pittman involved. Jonathan Taylor, a good ball game. 222 pass yards, a touchdown, and 38 rushing yards for the veteran with a touchdown. So right here, week 11, very tough matchup. No doubt about it versus the Philadelphia Eagles. That give up the second least amount of fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. But coming off, obviously, a good ball game is Matt Ryan. I'm going to recommend him as an ad. Obviously, in the deepest of leagues, it's going to be an ad for Ryan. And right now, if you're in a pinch at quarterback, he's available in 89% of fantasy leagues. Next guy is Davis Mills of the Houston Texans. So Davis Mills, I know he's not a good quarterback, but in terms of fantasy football, he's at least been serviceable for some part of the season here. The last couple games here for Mills, week 9 versus Philly, 154 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 Intos, and 18 rushing yards. And then week 10 at the Giants, 319 pass yards, a touchdown, and an Into. So in this ball game at the Giants, he got Nico Collins back and Brandon Cooks after they missed their week 9 matchup versus the Philadelphia Eagles. In week 11, he's got a good matchup and a 1-week guy that I would require to get on the wire this week versus the Commanders that give up the 11th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. So right now, Davis Mills available in tons of fantasy leagues, obviously, in 93%. And if you're in a real pinch, I think he can help owners out in week 11 because of the matchup and a matchup-based quarterback. He is the next quarterback I looked at on the wire this week, Jared Goff of the Detroit Lions. Obviously, Goff, he's not available in many fantasy leagues, 42% only. But right now, a decent matchup versus the New York Giants coming up in MetLife Stadium that give up the 12th least amount of fantasy points to quarterbacks. But Jared Goff, he looked good in the bowl game at the Bears and a comeback from behind victory. So right now, in deeper leagues, he's a good ad, getting you anywhere from 16 to 20 fantasy points weekly. It's been for Jared Goff. So week 8 versus Miami, 321 pass yards, a touchdown in that one. Week 9 versus the Packers, 137 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, and Into. And then week 10 at Chicago, 236 pass yards, a touchdown, and 14 rushing. So the Lions have actually won 2 ball games in a row. At the Giants, we'll see if they can win the game. I highly doubt they will, but at least Amon St. Brown looked good, going over 100 yards in that ball game for this Detroit Lion team. DeAndre Swift, he scored a touchdown. Jamal Williams scored a touchdown. So this offense here has some decent weapons on it, obviously, for this Detroit Lion team. And I think Jared Goff could be a serviceable quarterback this week. And the final quarterback I looked at on the wire this week is Deshaun Watson of the Cleveland Browns. So Watson right now, he gets to start practicing this week, but won't return, obviously. It's a week 13 versus former team, the Houston Texans. But right now, available in tons of fantasy leagues here is Watson in 63% of leagues. And I know Watson hasn't played in a year and a half, 2 seasons now. But this Cleveland Brown team, they actually have some good weapons. Obviously, you got Nick Chubb. You got Kareem Hunt in the backfield as 2 solid running backs. You got, obviously, Amari Cooper having a resurgent season in his first year with the Browns. And you got Donovan People-Jones really coming on over the last few weeks. So right now, Deshaun Watson, if you look into the future, obviously, for the remainder of the season, he's got a decent schedule. Week 13 at Houston, like I mentioned. Week 14 at Cincinnati. Week 15 versus Baltimore. And Week 16 versus New Orleans. And 17 at Washington. So a pretty solid schedule here for Watson. But like I said, I don't know what we're going to get from him 100%. But right now, we know the type of athlete and quarterback he could be for fantasy football. And if you're in a pinch or just want to take a gamble on him, he's available in 63% of fantasy weeks. That's a few quarterbacks I looked at on the wire here for week 11 of the fantasy football season.